Diplomacy is moving forward, even as fighting continues. Russia and Ukraine are preparing for another round of direct talks, with the United States calling it a major step, despite fresh strikes on both sides. Meanwhile, in Gaza, U.S. envoys met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to push the next phase of the ceasefire, even as Israeli violations on the ground persist. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi, and this is In Focus. As the war continues, Ukraine and Russia have agreed to hold a second round of U.S.-brokered peace talks next weekend, according to The Guardian. The talks follow a two-day meeting in Abu Dhabi and are set to resume on February the 1st, marking the first known direct contact between the two sides under a plan pushed by U.S. President Donald Trump. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that the discussions were constructive, but Kiev accused Moscow of undermining the talks after Russia launched overnight drone and missile strikes that cut power to millions. Russia, meanwhile, says that Ukrainian attacks have also continued. Despite growing diplomatic momentum, both sides remain deadlocked over territory, particularly in eastern Ukraine's Donbas region. And for more on this, joins us from Kiev is Mr. Ivan Us, advisor at Ukraine National Center. Welcome, Mr. Us, to Qnews. Sir, now, a U.S. official says that the first round of trilateral talks showed a lot of progress towards peace. What does this say about the trajectory of diplomatic efforts so far? And does it really put a deal within reach?
Greetings to you, Hala. Greetings to all Qnews audience. Thank you for the invitation. You know, Hala, actually, I think that the United States of America, of course, constantly push on Ukraine to go on those talks. Actually, we do that previous year, and we do this time, of course, U.S. press on Russia. And according to rumors, according to leaks that we received from American side and actually from Russian side, actually, due to, first of all, problems inside Russian economy, Russia agreed for those talks and agreed for some concessions. We still don't know what actually concession could be made by Russia and what Ukraine could do, because, you know, President of Ukraine, Zelensky, half an hour ago made a speech where he said that all sides should be ready for concession, including the United States of America. So, of course, the U.S. played as a mediator in these talks. Nevertheless, we know that we have 2 days talks, approximately next week or at the 1st of February, the date that we hear there will be. So now the process moving on, so we will see its result probably in a week or two.
Kiev has criticized Russia for launching drone and missile strikes on Kiev and Kharkiv during the latest round of talks. So is this a pressure tactic by the Kremlin to gain leverage, or does Moscow see military gains as compatible with negotiations?
You know, Hala, of course, in Ukraine we have a feeling that Russia don't need those talks. Russia go on those talks because they're afraid that Donald Trump can give to Ukraine either Tomahawk missiles or some other weapon. So for them it will be nice if the US will not do the step. Plus, United States of America start some pressure on Russia while starting to arrest the Black Shadow tankers that help to Russia to sell their oil. Nevertheless, in Russia, there is a group that wants talks, but the other group don't want those talks. That's why Russia, with parallel with these talks, made a constant strike on Ukraine. Really, this strike that you mentioned 2 days ago, serious strike, and I hear it very well because it happened not far away from my residential building where I'm living. The Ukrainian factory was seriously damaged. One person was murdered there. So unfortunately, there is not a clear vision for peace talks from Russian side. And Russia wants to say that we could receive the victory by all means, even not paying attention on the fact that in a month or even less than in a month, there will be the fourth anniversary of that tragic war for Ukraine. Thank you, Hala.
Yes. U.S. envoys Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff held 4 hours of talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow ahead of the trilateral meeting. So how effective was that encounter in paving the way for the first direct talks since the war began?
So, of course, we see that U.S. won these talks. For me, it's hard to imagine them. Nevertheless, you know that according to statement from the US side, there was a direct talk during this Abu Dhabi meeting. But I'm not sure that US correctly presents this information. Quite possible it was direct talks between representatives of delegations. And when they move out of the hall without the head of the United Arab Emirates, and Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, quite possible that representatives of delegation can exchange some words, but it was not direct talks. It was just exchange of opinions because we have no progress on political side, but at least there is a progress in military side, at least discussing the monitoring of peace. Peace, if it will be achieved, let's call it so, because there is no clear understanding whether there will be ceasefire, but at least talks about monitoring of ceasefire was discussed during these talks. Thank you, Hala.
I understand. The governor of Russia's Belgorod region says that Ukrainian forces carried out a massive attack on the regional capital. What message is Kiev sending by striking during ongoing peace negotiations, and how did you read his statements?
You know, Hala, it's a very important moment that, first of all, Russia starts this war. Secondly, when Russia attacked Ukrainian capital, Kiev, and big cities in our country, first of all, Kharkiv, Odessa, and Dnipro, Ukraine are not responding in Moscow or St. Petersburg. Ukraine responding on the Belgorod, Oryol, or some other Ukrainian, not far away from Ukrainian territory, cities. But the message is simple. That we say to Russians not living in Moscow, guys, you become the victim of the war that Moscow starts against Ukraine. But we could not respond to Moscow, we will respond to you. Because you attacked us, we respond to you, but not on Moscow, on you. And the idea is simple. People in those cities, in Belgrade and other, in their public, start to say, why everything okay in Moscow? Moscow lives like nothing happened, but we live without electricity. And the main idea, hatred to Moscow. Yes. I think that is tactics of Ukraine. Thank you, Hal.
In your own view, Mr. Us, is Kiev negotiating from a position of strength or growing pressure?
I think we are talking from position of weakening Russia economy because we understand that Russia is stronger. So to talk from the position of strength for Ukraine, it will be unrealistic. But we constantly said, guys, you see what's happening with your economy. You see that we still don't have the end of the first month of the year, but the inflation in Russia skyrocketing due to the fact that you print a lot of money, you increase taxes, and people that paying more and more taxes due that was increased start to close their businesses, and you received the problems in receiving tax and so on. That's why Ukrainian position that this war is not effective. You furthermore this week can let Russia to split like the war against Afghanistan led to the split of Soviet Union. It was a very big Soviet Union. It was very small Afghanistan. But the result of that 10-year war led to split of Soviet Union. The same situation can be with Russia. So Ukraine said to Russia, stop this war and you will not think about problems inside your country that already actually starting to happen in the economic field. Thank you, Hannah.
The talks represent the first direct contact between the two sides under the Trump administration's mediation. So to what extent is this progress a result of a genuine shift in Moscow and Kiev's positions versus simply responding to pressure from the new White House administration?
Of course, the White House administration makes this pressure and wants the talks, but first of all, we should understand this lineup of that delegation. So from Ukrainian side, it's the head of President Office, Kirill Budanov. It's the head of our Security Council, Rustam Umerov. So it's something like Vice President of the United States of America or the security advisor of the president. But who was from the Russian side? or who is, if we are talking about those talks, it's the head of their foreign intelligence. So I just compare level of delegations. It means that we can talk a lot about some plans, but from Russian side, it's not decision makers. So they could return to Moscow, even not to Putin, but to people who are higher than those people and subordinate to Putin, and received no and negative response to the proposition. Now we discussed 20 items plan, and what is the value of those talks if we're discussing it not with the decision makers but with people who subordinate to decision makers and who can say that we don't need this result, so on and so forth. That's why we constantly repeat that should be go high level of a delegation, like from Ukrainian side. The same should be from Russian side too. Thank you, Hannah.
Both sides agree that the fate of the Donbass is the main unresolved issue. Is there any realistic middle ground between sovereign Ukrainian territory and the maximalist demands that Russia continues to reiterate?
Hala, of course, we understand that Russia wants Donbass. We didn't plan to give Donbass to Russia because, just to explain, the part of Donbass that Russia wants to receive not due to military way, but due to diplomatic way, is the most defended part of Ukraine. So if Russia receives it, it seriously improved Russian position, and the further war or next war that will happen not in many years, that can happen less than in 1 year. From better position, Russia received better chances to conquer whole Ukraine, or at least largest part of our country. We understand that. We know that Russia always promised that they will never attack Ukraine, but they always do that. It was in 2014, then it was in 2022. So too many times when Russia said that we will not attack, but already attacked, having all documents. We have in 2003, we signed the deal between Ukraine and Russia that Russia recognized Ukrainian border. But in 2014, they forgot about this deal. Then we have Minsk agreement in 2014, but in 2022, they forgot about that. That's why we are not planning to give Donbass to Russia. Russia will press on us on this point that we should give it to them. And I think that we want to win time for problems in Russia economy that can seriously influence on Russia to say that they agree with the freezing of this war that Ukraine and the US proposed for at least for half a year or so. Thank you, Hannah.
With the next round set for February the 1st, what specific deliverable must we see to believe that this is a peace process, not just a temporary pause in a 4-year war?
Hannah, I think that it's temporary pause, unfortunately, because, as I said, Russia didn't plan to stop, but the result that I'm expected is not the end of this war. The result that I'm expected, taking into account the place where those negotiations took place and presence of the head of United Arab Emirates, is exchange of prisoners of war, because we have a long pause in exchanging of prisoners of war, and many Ukrainians now in Russia situated, as many Russians situated at the Ukrainian territory. So we need to exchange them, and that's the result that I'm expected. But saying that something serious could be actually changed after those, even next series of talks after 1st of February, as of now, at least I couldn't say that I am expecting that. Thank you, Hal.
Okay. Mr. Ivan Us, advisor at Ukraine National Center, thank you so much, sir, for joining us and always having you and your valuable discussions on Qnews. Ladies and gentlemen, we turn now to Gaza, where diplomacy and violence once again collide as Israeli violations continue and U.S. envoys push for the next phase of the ceasefire. Top U.S. envoys met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Saturday, urging a move to the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire. According to Al-Sharq Al-Awsat, the talks focused on recovering the remains of the last detainee and next steps towards demilitarizing Gaza, as Washington presses to keep the Trump-brokered deal on track. A key signal of progress would be reopening the Palestinian side of the Rafah crossing, which Palestinian officials say could happen this week. Meanwhile, Israeli occupation forces continued their violations in the Gaza Strip, with renewed shelling, gunfire, and ground incursions reported in several areas across the territory. And for more analysis, we're joined from Iowa by Mr. Nauman Abu Isa, political analyst on U.S. affairs. Welcome, sir, to Q News. And let me start by asking you, U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff recently described this phase as a transition from a military pause to demilitarization and reconstruction. But is Gaza realistically ready for that shift while Israeli forces still control more than half the territory?
Thank you for hosting me. Yes, that's what Witkoff is shooting for. The United States and Israel have a huge plan for the Middle East. They want to move on with the security and the normalization presence in the Middle East. And they know that the Palestinians are the obstacle to their project, and they are trying to bypass the Palestinians and work with the international community to provide some kind of incentives that they are working on a project that will benefit everybody, even though the Palestinians do not have their approvals yet, and the Israel occupy more than half of the Gaza Strip.
What strategic objective, sir, is the U.S. prioritizing by pushing phase 2 now?
Absolutely. That's what the United States is pushing for. They are trying to convince Israel to move from phase 1 to phase 2. And the Israeli have gave the consent, even though they were putting the one hostage or one body of hostage left in the Gaza Strip as an obstacle. However, that obstacle is not enough for the United States to allow Israel to keep within the first phase. They want to move on to the second phase to open the border points and allow humanitarian and other needs for the Palestinians to come in.
Mm-hmm. Netanyahu faces intense domestic pressure to hold phase 2 until the remains of the last detainee, Eran Gvili, are recovered. So does the U.S. push to keep the deal-moving conflict with Israel's core survival strategy?
The Palestinian, the Israeli Prime Minister first said that he was not going to join the peace board. Then he got the invitation and he agreed to move, even though he has internal objection, and he knows that the extremist or his extremist government in general does not want to allow the Palestinians to have any kind of relief from the current harsh circumstances. They want to keep the pressure on the Palestinians to push them outside, to continue with their ethnic cleansing projects, to make it uninhabitable for the Palestinians to leave and keep the Gaza Strip for the Israelis. However, the United States has looked into two options for moving forward. First, they looked for an option to work with the Palestinians and allow for Hamas area and then a non-Hamas area, and then they decided to go ahead and make the plan for the whole ground of the Gaza Strip, hoping that the Palestinians will agree and move along with them, even though the Israeli government is also, I guess, as Netanyahu is moving along, and he has to convince his minister of Smotrich, basically, and Ben Gvir, those extremists in his government, that it's in the benefit for the Israelis to move ahead with this plan.
With the Israeli Security Cabinet meeting ongoing, what divisions are likely to surface within Netanyahu's government, especially in light with what you just said regarding the extreme right government, and how will domestic political pressures shape his response?
The Prime Minister Netanyahu is very shrewd politician, and he knows that there are objectors to this policy on the extreme in his government, and they are going to demand more concessions from the international communities to close gates to the Palestinians and to have more control, allow the Israelis to control 50% of the land and also the sea and air above the around Gaza Strip, and that will make sure that the Gaza Strip will never rearm and the Hamas will be forced for disarming.
And at this stage, sir, do you think that he's negotiating policy or managing coalition survival?
They have a long-range plan, and they are working on a strategic steps toward the normalization and de-arming the Palestinians. And this is working with many players in the international communities and working hand in hand with the United States government and Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who are very, very connected to the Israelis, and they work closely with the prime ministers of Israel, and they have first hand relationship with the president of the United States. So they know how to push the buttons in the United States, and they get the approval of President Trump, and they try to move with the Israelis' wishes in multiple fronts on this file.
Mm-hmm. And how do you read Israeli violations on the ground right now?
The Israelis are willing to violate all the agreements as long as there is acceptance from the other participants, and they seem to have the green card now to allow Israel to kill few people here and few Palestinians basically on daily basis, and there's no objection from the international community or from the American administrations, and they will keep doing that, given that they know when there is enough strength to stop them from doing that, they will stop. Otherwise, they are going to use all available means to advance their control over the Palestinians.
Mm-hmm. In your own view, sir, can Israel realistically pursue demilitarization without reoccupying Gaza? And at what point might Israeli military objectives begin to undermine political outcomes?
The agreement is clear that it should be demilitarizing Hamas at the same time for the Israel to evacuate the occupied portions of the Gaza Strip after the 7th of October. And the international community, including the Arab and Muslim countries on the board, they are going to try to push Israel to conform to the agreement clause, and that is to evacuate from Gaza. However, Israel, it's hard for Israel to evacuate. They want to actually build settlements and make it an Israeli land. And that is the struggle now in, between the Israel's objections and the international community objectives. And we'll see how that fares out in the next weeks and months to come.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How serious are the discussions around the next steps towards demilitarizing Gaza? What does that realistically entail, in your own opinion?
That is, I guess, that's what the objective of the Israeli government to demilitarize Gaza Strip and basically take all the arms from Hamas and the jihad groups in the Gaza Strip. However, realistically, there is as long as there's occupation and control, there will be resistance. This phase of the agreement, the second phase, has agreed upon to remove all the arms from the Gaza Strip, and then Israel also have to conform and withdraw from the Gaza Strip at the same time. And if there is no Israeli withdrawal, there will not be Palestinians leaving their weapons. And then if there was some leaving of weapons, there will be resistance. And even those groups, if they surrender their arms, there will be other groups and other resistant groups, and they will be resisting in all means possible without arms even, and especially if the agreement moves forward and there is a development for the Gaza Strip and there is lots of projects and rebuilding of the Gaza Strip. I'm sure the Palestinians want to be part of the rebuilding, and they will not allow foreigners to rebuild without their consent and their participation.
Mm-hmm. Despite these talks and despite pressure from the White House, the Israeli forces are still escalating by shelling, gunfire, ground incursions. How do you reconcile diplomacy with these actions? How can we have talks and at the same time such violations on civilians in Gaza?
It's very hard for the international communities to allow the Israelis to continue with their targeting and killing of the Palestinians, and then moving at the same time toward peace and reconciliation and having a rebuilding of the Gaza Strip, as we saw the plan of Jared Kushner. He has a master plan for the Gaza Strip with the residential areas, commercial areas, and seafront. That's what he values the most: the seafront, touristic areas, and that will all never happen as long as Israel is keep shooting. But the Israelis wants to keep the pressure on the Palestinians to disarm and keep them under their control as much as possible until such a time that the Palestinians are giving up and participating with the international community.
Yes, to elaborate on what you just told me, sir, Washington is pressing to keep the Trump-Rocker deal on track, and you just mentioned the deal for Gaza. What leverage does the U.S. actually have right now?
The president of the United States does have a leverage over Israel, and Israel has a lobby also in the United States, which has the pressure points. They know how to use them in the United States. However, the president has put some pressure in the past on the prime minister of Israel, and he might do that in the future, because the president of the United States also wants to see a successful end to the conflict in Gaza, and he wants to move on with the larger peace efforts in the Middle East, and the reconciliation between Israel and its neighbors. They are working with the Syrians and many other countries for that reconciliation. And the president of the United States wants to have a master deals, basically huge reconstruction deals and development in the area, and have those development work with the American governments for bringing dollars back to the United States. And that's one of his objectives, that he knows the American government is working on a deficit, and he wants to reconcile that deficit by bringing more business to the American companies and have more development in the Middle East.
Mr. Abu Isa, is there real momentum behind this deal, or we are just seeing diplomatic pressure without concrete guarantees on the ground?
There is no guarantees. However, there is momentum. 20 countries have signed up on this peace agreements, peace board, and the president of the United States wants the permanent members to contribute $1 billion each for this kind of effort, and that money is possible if there is substantial plans and step by step convincing plans that the plan will become reality. Nobody is going to pledge money for a plan on paper. They want that plan to be doable, achievable, and there need to be steps and agreements to have people from all participants agreeing to this plan. And that will be what we will be seeing in the next weeks ahead of us, when the diplomacy will work with with all participants to make this plan a reality and have a convincing momentum for this plan to happen.
What should we be experiencing or watching for the coming days that would indicate real progress in moving into phase 2 of the ceasefire?
It's really the Palestinians are the party which has not participated much in the plan yet, and they need to be included. The Palestinians leadership need to be included. They've had some Palestinian participation, but not enough. They need to have more Palestinian participation from both Gaza and the West Bank, and that will be the blocking point. If that did not happen, it's very hard to work without the Palestinians. So they need to also work with the neighboring countries, make sure that the neighboring countries can leverage their relationship with the Palestinians to convince them to participate moving forward, and have some guarantees that the Palestinian people will have their needs met. The Palestinian people in Gaza are suffering now from cold and lack of resources. They are asking for caravans, for example, asking for hospitals or mobilized hospitals to meet their needs, and they need to fulfill those humanitarian needs for the Palestinians before they can move forward.
Mr. Nauman Abu Isa, political analyst on U.S. Affairs, thank you so much, sir, for joining us here on Q News. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all for today's episode of In Focus. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned. More updates will come your way here on Q News.